The ballroom at the Harrington Hotel cost $4,000 to rent for an evening. I know this because I approved the invoice myself. What I didn't know, what I absolutely could not have scripted if I tried, was that the man standing at the center of that ballroom in a new Italian suit, champagne glass raised, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, was my husband, my soon to be ex husband. The one who had sat across from me at our kitchen table 11 weeks earlier and told me, calmly, like he was reading from a memo, that he was leaving me for another woman, that she was younger, that her father was wealthy, that he had, and I quote, outgrown this chapter. He didn't know that the company he worked for had just been acquired. He didn't know who had led that acquisition, and he absolutely did not know that the chair at the head of the conference table, the chair that would be turning around to greet him and his new girlfriend at the company gala in approximately 4 minutes, was mine. I smoothed my jacket, I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and I thought, Richard Elaine Mallory, you have no idea what chapter you just walked into. My name is Caroline Diane Mallory. Up until recently, people knew me as a quiet woman who worked long hours, drove a sensible car, and was married to a man who made sure everyone in the room knew how important he was. Now, I'm the CEO of Nexbridge Capital Partners, and this, every single second of this, was an accident. The best accident of my life. Let me tell you who I was before all of this, because the before matters. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, middle of three daughters. My father was a high school math teacher. My mother managed the books for a small manufacturing company, sat at a desk in a back office for 30 years, knew every number in that building by heart, and never once got her name on the letterhead. That image of her never left me. I went to Ohio State on an academic scholarship, finance major, graduated near the top of my class, took a position as a junior analyst at a mid-size investment firm in Cincinnati, and spent the next decade doing what driven, focused, moderately introverted women in finance do. I worked. Hard, quietly, consistently. I met Richard at a colleague's birthday party when I was 29. He was 32, handsome in that effortless way that makes you feel like you're the lucky one just being in the conversation. He worked in corporate sales. He had a laugh that filled every room he walked into. He was charming and funny, and he made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like I didn't have to be serious every single minute. We dated for 2 years, got married on a Saturday in September, a real ceremony, 200 people, the whole production. Richard wanted the big wedding. He always wanted the big version of everything. We moved to Chicago. I joined a boutique investment firm called Nexbridge, then just a 15-person operation, as a senior analyst. Richard took a position in business development at a mid-sized tech company called Varela Systems. And for 9 years, I told myself we were happy. Some of those years, I think we actually were. The cracks started maybe 3 years in, though I've had a lot of time since to wonder if the cracks were always there and I just chose not to look directly at them. Richard liked being the most successful person in the room. That was fine when we were starting out. It made him ambitious, energetic, magnetic even. But as I moved up at Nexbridge, as I started closing bigger deals and getting more recognition, something shifted in him. He stopped asking about my work. Not abruptly, gradually, like a volume dial turning down so slowly you don't notice until you realize the room is silent. He'd talk about his accounts, his colleagues, his wins at dinner every night. And when I'd start to share something from my day, there'd be this almost imperceptible withdrawal, a check of his phone, a pivot back to his own story. I told myself he was just enthusiastic. That's what love does sometimes. It makes excuses that sound like grace. Meanwhile, Nexbridge was growing. The 15-person boutique became a 40-person firm, then 100, then 200. We started attracting serious institutional clients. I became a partner at 38, managing partner at 41. Richard got a regional director title at Varela. Good salary, nice office, company car. He was proud of it. I was proud of him. But Varela, as it turned out, was not doing well. The company had been mismanaged at the executive level for years. Bad acquisitions, bloated overhead, leadership that had no idea how to read a balance sheet. By the time I was 43, Varela Systems was in serious financial distress. I knew this because Nexbridge was one of 4 firms brought in confidentially to evaluate an acquisition. I knew this. Richard did not know I knew this. And Richard did not know that the Nexbridge board, 5 people I'd worked alongside for over a decade, had voted unanimously to name me chief executive officer. I planned to tell Richard about the CEO appointment the week it was finalized. I thought about how to say it, what wine to open, whether to cook dinner or go out. I imagined his reaction. Surprised, proud, maybe a little complicated in the way good news sometimes is for people who needed to feel like they were keeping pace. I never got the chance to have that conversation. Because on a Wednesday evening in March, Richard sat down across from me at our kitchen table, the farmhouse table we'd picked out together from an antique market in Michigan, the one with the uneven leg we'd always meant to fix, and he folded his hands and he told me he was leaving me. He said he'd been seeing someone. Her name was Brooke. She was 31. Her father was Lawrence Chadwick, the same Lawrence Chadwick whose family had founded Varela Systems, whose daughter had grown up with a trust fund and a penthouse, and every door already opened for her before she'd ever knocked. He said, and I want to be precise about the words because words matter, he said, "Caroline, I love you, but I've outgrown this chapter. Brooke and I have a real future. She's younger, she's connected, her family has real wealth. I think we both know this marriage has run its course." I sat very still. The refrigerator hummed, the neighbor's dog barked once, then went quiet. And I thought about a lot of things in that silence. I thought about 9 years, about the farmhouse table, about the way he used to call me on his lunch break just to hear my voice back when we were first married, about every version of myself I had loved him through. And then, slowly, underneath all of that, I felt something unexpected. Not devastation, clarity. Like a fog I hadn't realized I'd been standing in for years had just lifted all at once. I said, "Okay, Richard." He blinked. He had clearly prepared for more resistance. I said, "You should call an attorney this week. I'll have mine ready by Friday." I stood up from the table. I poured the rest of my tea down the sink. I went to my home office, closed the door quietly, and I sat down at my desk. And then, and only then, I let myself cry. Once, for about 20 minutes, for the woman who had believed for 9 years that being steady and excellent and present was enough to make someone stay. Then I dried my face, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Because Nexbridge had an acquisition to close, and Varela Systems, Lawrence Chadwick's company, Brooke Chadwick's inheritance, Richard Mallory's brand new future, was about to become mine. I want to be clear about something. I did not pursue the Varela acquisition because of Richard. The deal had been in motion for over a year before that kitchen table conversation. The numbers made sense, the market position made sense, the integration with Nexbridge's portfolio made sense. Richard being there, that was simply the universe having a sense of humor. But once I knew the full picture, I'm not going to pretend I wasn't paying extra attention. The acquisition closed in late April. Nexbridge purchased Varela Systems for a number I am not at liberty to disclose, but I will say it was not a rescue. It was a restructuring. The Chadwick family retained a minority stake, but operational control transferred fully to Nexbridge. To me. The entire Varela staff received transition notices in early May. All positions were under review. Retained employees would be confirmed on a rolling basis over 6 weeks. Richard Mallory received his transition notice on a Tuesday. He called me that evening, the first time we'd spoken since March, since the lawyers had taken over all the logistics of our separation. And he was furious, blindsided. He said Varela had been stolen, that the acquisition was predatory, that Lawrence Chadwick had been betrayed by people he trusted. I listened. I said, "I'm sorry to hear you're going through that, Richard. I hope it resolves well for you." He said, "Do you even care? I'm telling you I might lose my job." I said, "I'm sure you'll land on your feet. You always do." And I hung up. Now, here's where I need to tell you what happened next, because this is the part that sounds like fiction that is completely true. My VP of Human Resources, a woman named Sandra O'Coffer, one of the sharpest people I have ever worked with, came to my office the following week with the preliminary retention list for former Varela staff. She walked me through each department. When she got to business development, she pulled up Richard's file. She said, "Caroline, I want to flag something." She told me that Richard Mallory had, in the weeks following the acquisition announcement, before he even knew the outcome, had submitted a request to be considered for the newly created VP of Strategic Growth position, a senior role, good title, significant compensation. He had submitted this request through Lawrence Chadwick's daughter, through Brooke, who had, bless her heart, forwarded it with a personal note to the interim transition committee, believing her family connection would carry weight. Sandra set the file down on my desk and looked at me. I said, "Sandra, whose signature is required for VP appointments?" She said, "Yours, Caroline." I said, "Schedule the gala." She smiled, just slightly. Already started the venue search. That's Sandra. I'll never find another one like her. The NextBridge Varela Integration Gala was framed publicly as a celebration of the acquisition and a welcome to retained Varela staff, which it was. It was also, and I say this with complete honesty, the most carefully considered evening I have ever designed. I wore a midnight blue suit, no jewelry except my mother's watch, which I wear on every important day. My hair was up. I had been told by people whose opinions I respect that I look formidable in navy. I chose formidable. Sandra had arranged the program: cocktail hour, remarks from the NextBridge board, then dinner, then the formal introduction of new executive leadership, meaning me. There was a small theatrical element Sandra had suggested and I had approved. I would be seated at the head table with my back to the room during the cocktail hour, visible only from behind, before being formally introduced and turning to face the room. It was dramatic. Richard would absolutely have called it extra. I thought it was efficient. Now, Richard had been told by Brooke that this gala was connected to his anticipated promotion. She had, apparently, been reassuring him for weeks that her family connection was carrying his transition, that he was a top candidate for the VP role, that this evening was a celebration of his future at the newly restructured company. None of that was true, but Brooke believed it, and Richard believed it. So when he walked into the Harrington Hotel ballroom that evening, new suit, champagne glass, Brooke on his arm, he walked in thinking this party was for him. I watched on the small monitor Sandra had set up in the anteroom. He looked happy, relaxed. He was working the room the way he always did: handshakes, laughter, that big, easy charm. Brooke looked lovely in a green dress. She seemed genuinely sweet. She's not the villain of this story. She was just a young woman who loved a man who wasn't available and whose father had promised her things he couldn't deliver. She didn't know any more than Richard did. I watched them find their table. I watched Richard flag down a waiter for more champagne. I watched him settle into the evening like a man who had no idea the ground was about to move. Then Sandra's voice came over the earpiece. "We're ready, Caroline." I set down my water glass. I walked to the head table. I sat down. I faced the window. The city lights of Chicago spread out in the dark below. And I waited. The board chairman, my colleague of 11 years, Gerald Whitmore, took the microphone at precisely 8:45. He spoke about the acquisition, the strategy, the vision, the integration. He spoke about NextBridge's growth trajectory. He thanked the Varela teams for their resilience through the transition. And then he said, "It is my honor to introduce for the first time in her official capacity as Chief Executive Officer of NextBridge Capital Partners, Caroline Mallory." I stood. I turned around. The room applauded, warmly, genuinely. These were colleagues, people who knew me, people who had watched me build this. I was looking at the room. The room was looking at me. And Richard Mallory, in the third row, champagne glass halfway to his mouth, new suit, brand new life, went the color of copy paper. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared, and the glass stayed frozen in the air between the table and his lips. And Brooke was clapping next to him because she didn't know yet. And I watched the exact moment it landed. The exact moment he understood. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I smiled. Not the smile of a woman who is angry, not the smile of someone who has been waiting to do damage. The smile of a woman who is perfectly, completely, serenely fine. And I turned to the microphone. I gave my remarks. 8 minutes. Focused, specific, forward-looking. I talked about integration strategy and team values and what the next 18 months would mean for both organizations. I thanked Gerald and the board. I thanked the Varela staff for their patience. I did not look at Richard again during the remarks. I didn't need to. After the formal program, during dinner, Sandra approached my table quietly and said, "He's asked to speak with you, privately. He's waiting near the east corridor." I finished my water. I excused myself from my table. I found him by the tall windows overlooking the street. He looked hollowed out, like someone had taken a pin to everything he'd been inflating for weeks. He said, "Caroline." Just my name. Nothing attached to it. I said, "Richard?" He said, when did—" I said, "The board voted in February. The acquisition closed in April. The retention decisions are being finalized this week." His jaw moved. "The VP role," I said, "was never yours. I'm sorry if you were told otherwise." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Are you going to fire me?" And I want you to hear exactly what I said, because I thought about it for a long time. I said, "I'm going to be honest with you, because that's something I always was. You're not being retained for a VP position. There is an analyst-level role in the Midwest Regional Office. It's a significant step back in title and compensation. If you want it, it's yours, and you'll be evaluated on your performance like everyone else. If you don't want it, I understand. But that is what I can offer you." He stared at me. I said, "Take a few days to decide. Sandra will be your point of contact." And I walked back to my table. I ate my dinner. It was very good. Poached salmon with a lemon caper sauce. I had chosen the menu myself. Richard did not take the analyst role. He moved to Denver with Brooke. I heard through mutual friends that he's in sales consulting now. Independent contractor, good lifestyle, seems to be doing fine. I genuinely hope that's true. I mean that without irony. We finalized our divorce in July. Clean. No contested assets, no dragged-out proceedings. My attorney was excellent. The farmhouse table went to Goodwill. I'm told someone else's family is eating dinner on it now, which seems right. Brooke's father, Lawrence Chadwick, reached out to me through his attorney a month after the gala. Professional conversation about the minority stake terms. It was cordial. He is not a bad man. He made some poor decisions, trusted the wrong people at the executive level, and watched his company slip away. I understand that. I've seen it happen to good people. Sandra got a well-deserved raise. And me? I drive to the Next Bridge offices every morning. 43rd floor. Corner office, not because I demanded it, but because that's where they put the CEO, and I happen to be the CEO. I have a standing 8 o'clock with my leadership team. I drink 1 cup of coffee at my desk before anyone arrives, and I look out at the city. At Chicago in all its complicated, gray and gold, loud and quiet, relentless beauty. And I think about my mother, sitting in that back office for 30 years with every number memorized and her name on nothing. I think about her every single morning. And I think, "Mom, look, they put our name on the door." I did not plan this story. I did not engineer Richard's downfall or scheme my way into power or set any of this in motion as some elaborate revenge. I just worked. For 20 years, I just worked. Methodically, consistently, without making noise about it. I built trust with the right people. I made decisions carefully. I said what I meant and did what I said. And when the opportunity came, I was ready for it. Not because I'd been waiting for him to fail, but because I'd been building something real. And here is what I want to say to you directly, because this is the part that matters. If you are the woman in the room who everyone underestimates, the one who doesn't take up loud space, who isn't performing her ambition for an audience, who is just quietly, steadily excellent, do not shrink that. Do not apologize for it. Do not let anyone convince you that because you didn't announce it, it isn't real. Your work is real. Your value is real. The table you're building toward, it exists. And when you finally sit at the head of it, and you will, you won't need to say a word. You'll just turn around, and the room will understand. My name is Caroline Diane Mallory. I am the CEO of NextBridge Capital Partners, and the salmon at the gala was excellent.